your front page story in the Journal this morning sort of has to do with Apple, but this is really more about what's being done to Apple, or what was done to Apple by Google. And so it looks like now we've got multiple investigations by law enforcement agencies on both sides of the Atlantic into how Google maybe overrode privacy settings on mobile devices.
Yeah, so basically last month we wrote a story about how Google was circumventing the privacy settings. So people who were using Apple Safari web browser, which is the default browser on the iPad, the iPhone, and Mac computers and some other
Sorry,
people.
you wouldn't know that.
For your benefit.
I'm free from all
There
of
is
this.
a phone, it's called the iPhone, and it uses this thing called Safari. You can look it up on IE.
Good to know. All right, I'll read about it on Wikipedia. Okay.
Right. So
Suddenly
anyway,
she's making me feel young now. This is good.
This is good for you. So basically, this Safari browser by default blocks most tracking, and Google had actually developed this sort of secret workaround. So if you were looking at a web page that had an ad placed by Google, which is by the way the vast majority of web pages, they were putting invisible things in the ad so that even if you didn't click on it, you didn't touch it, you didn't even notice the ad, it was filling out a little form and sending it back to Google and tricking Safari into thinking that you wanted to interact with the ad. And then Safari would allow Google to start tracking you. So when we called Google about this back in February, they were like, oops, mistake, turned it off. But now we have news that the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, EU's a European-wide investigation has been launched, and several state attorneys general are looking into it. So they're facing investigations on this front from a lot of different agencies.
And what about, so in the story you just mentioned, Google says this was inadvertent.
Yes.
What do,
Well,
federal...
actually, that's great because I want to, if I can jump in there with saying, because the actual quote you had in the story from the Google spokeswoman was, "We didn't anticipate this," and that made me wonder: did she mean they didn't anticipate this happening, or they didn't anticipate getting caught?
Yeah.
No,
And that sounds like a snide question, but it's not, because they might have just thought, well, no one's going to notice this, and it's not going to be a big deal.
Right. Well, I don't want to say what she meant in her quote. I can't speak to it, but they have definitely said that they didn't mean to be tracking people who had just said explicitly they didn't want to be tracked. And the technical reason for this is sort of weird and wonky, but they were, Google and Facebook are battling each other, and Facebook has this like button that they put all over the web. So Google has its +1 button it puts everywhere. So the actual reason they were doing this was they were trying to embed the +1 button into ads so that if you liked an ad, you would click the +1. And for various technical reasons, they felt that this was the way that they had to get around the settings on Apple browsers to put that +1 button in. And they said they didn't think about the fact that after you left that page, they could then subsequently, in many cases, track you around the web through their advertising network.
And that's really at the heart of the issue, because I think you mentioned in your story it's going to be an uphill battle for investigators to prove that it was intentional, right? So proving the intent is going to be hard
So
in
for
this instance.
fines, you need to prove, so all of these investigations are ones that people with fining authority, right? So you could get an investigation pretty easily, like the way that they were investigated last year for their Buzz social network, where they had a similar kind of oops, we didn't mean to situation. They didn't get a fine. They settled with the FTC. So now the FTC is saying, well, did you violate the agreement we had? And they're trying to get penalties, but there you need to prove it was a willful violation. And so it was a question of willful. I mean, we can't make that determination, but that's going to be what the investigators have to figure out.
Pulling back from the investigation and whether or not there was intent, just look into the fantastic work you've done on this issue over the past year and a half with the What They Know series. I mean, the sense you get, though, is that there is really, even if not intentional, a serious just lack of thinking about privacy, users' privacy on the internet by some of the biggest companies we deal with.
Which could hasten lack of trust from users,
yes,
right?
Agreed. So, I mean, the thing is, right now, the problem is that there doesn't seem to be a very good, quality assurance kind of program inside of these companies. They promise the FTC, we're going to put in all these audits and check privacy issues, but the fact of the matter is they have to spend money to make sure that they're not invading people's privacy, and there's no countervailing pressure, right? there's no one, there's no, they're going to make more money, and we're not going to notice most of the time. So it's very hard to set up incentives so that companies spend a lot of time testing their products to make sure that they don't invade privacy, possibly until some fines come along.
And you,
Right.
you mentioned fines in the story, and I mean the fines could really add up. I think it was for one of the agencies, it
Right.
was like $16,000 per day
but
per
this
person.
is Google we're talking about. They've got a bit of cash.
They've got a bit of cash, but I mean those numbers could really add up in
No,
terms
right,
of the fines
because we're
if
talking about
something's
millions of
proved.
people, right. So we'll see how it all plays out, and maybe this is finally the moment where people think, you know what, it is worth it to avoid those fines, to start testing our products a little more before we put them out.
Right. All right. Well, Julia, thank you for
Thanks.
that, and keep up the great work
Thank
on
you.
this, because
Yeah.
that you are being the counterweight to the
That's it.
companies, and
I'm
that's
the
important.
counterweight.
That's very important.
You're the quality assurance control.
I